So today we're going to start talking about monomials, kind of what they are and how that we add and subtract and multiply those. So first off, a monomial is either a number, a variable, or a product of a number and variable. And we called this before a term. When we were talking about a vocabulary of different parts of an equation or expression, we considered a monomial to be a term. So example would be a number like 24 or -6/11. Those would be a monomial. But also a variable like x or bc. Those multiply together. Or the product of a number and variables like 5x. 3x squared, 9x squared y to the 7th. Because there's multiplication in between each of those pieces, it's still considered one term or a monomial. And even if we did -5/2 x y to the 4th, all of that is still considered one monomial. And monomials with the same variables and exponents are what we call like terms. And so we've talked about like terms in the past. And so when we go to add and subtract monomials together, we're actually combining like terms. We do not change the variables and the exponents when we're just adding monomial or two terms together. Okay, so for example, I have a 19x minus 24x. All I'm doing here is subtracting these coefficients. I am not changing the exponent or the variable, so it doesn't become -5x squared or -5 and we get rid of the x because it's x minus x. It's not how this works. We leave the variable alone and we just subtract the coefficient, so it becomes -5x. Another example of this would be like number 5, where we take 7ab and 4ac. Notice that ab is different than ac. Because they're different, they are not like terms. So we can't add them together, so we just leave it as 7ab plus 4ac. They're already as simplified as it can be. Okay, another example, number 9. We have a 2y minus 11y. So those two things are the same as far as the variable goes. So 2 minus 11 becomes -9y. Then we have 14z minus 10z. These are also the same variable. So we can do 14 minus 10, which is a positive 4z. Okay, now y and z are not the same, so we can't combine or simplify any further. We leave our answer just like that. Alright, and then one more example here, number 13. Find the sum of 14z squared and -9z squared. So sum means we're going to add them. So 14z squared plus -9z squared. We can combine these coefficients and it becomes 5z squared. Okay? So we've got plenty of additional practice problems or different, problems just to check your understanding. So you can go ahead and continue working through some of those. We're going to go ahead and start talking about multiplication on these as well. Okay, now when we multiply monomials, okay, now we're talking about multiplying two terms together. We want to use the product rule. And if you remember the product rule from your exponent rules, it's that when we take those two monomials, we add the exponents together. So for example, x to the 4th times x squared would be x to the 4th plus the 2 here, and so it becomes x to the 6th power. Okay, and we can kind of work that out if you wanted to. What x to the 4th really is x times x times x times x, and then we're multiplying that times x squared, which is x times x. So here we actually end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. That's where the x to the 6th power comes from. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. Again, a couple more practice here for you to look at. Alright, now what happens if there are coefficients? Okay, well first off we're just going to go ahead and multiply the coefficients together, and then we're going to multiply the variables together with the product rule. So for example, let's look at number 20 here. So number 20, I'm going to multiply 3 times 7, I get 21. X cubed times x squared becomes x to the 5th, because we're going to add the 3 and the 2 together. Okay, another example would be like 22, where we have 9 times 3, which is again 27, and then x times x to the 7th power, which you need to remember here, and it's key to remember, is that just because there's not an exponent here doesn't make it 0. it's understood to be 1. So it's 1 plus 7, so it becomes x to the 8th. Okay, so don't forget that. Alright, then we look here at 24. So here again we're going to multiply our coefficients. So negative 2 times negative 9 becomes 18. And then we multiply the like variables. So p to the 7th and p to the 4th becomes p to the 11th. Q to the 5th times q squared becomes q to the 7th. 5 and 2 is 7. And then r times r cubed, 1 and 3 becomes r to the 4th. Okay, and again we can't simplify that any further. Alright, so now what happens if we have 3 involved? Well, what I like to do is work on the first two first, and then move on and take what I got and multiply it by the third one. So I have 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. Y times y to the 4th becomes y to the 5th. Remember, it's a 1 there plus the 4. Now I'm going to take that and multiply it by 4 y to the 7th. So now negative 15 times 4 is negative 60. Y to the 5th times y to the 7th now becomes y to the 12th. We add the 5 and the 7 together. Sorry, that blurred out a little bit on me. There we go. So that becomes y to the 12th power. Okay, same thing here on 28. I'm just going to start by multiplying the first two monomials together. So negative 4, and this one doesn't have a coefficient, so we understand it to be 1, so it's just negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4. C cubed times c becomes c to the 4th. We're adding that 3 and that understood 1 there. And then d times d, 1 and 1 becomes d squared. Okay, now we're going to take that and multiply it by the 7c to the 4th d squared. So negative 4 times 7 becomes negative 28. C to the 4th times c to the 4th is c to the 8th. And d squared times d squared becomes d to the 4th. Okay. Alright, so again, plenty of things to practice here. Just take them step by step. I'll do one more here with you, number 30. Where here I have, let's do 33. I'm going to skip down and do that one. So here I have 16r times 5/4 q squared r to the 5th. So first I'm going to do 16 times 5/4, which ends up being 20. Okay. Then I have an r times an r to the 5th, which is 5 and 1, which is 6. And then we also have this q squared, which is not being multiplied by any other q squared. So all we're going to do is just bring that straight down. So it becomes 20 r to the 6th power q squared. Okay, and that's where all of that comes into play. Alright, so here's a little bit of kind of mixing it up and adding all of those things together. And so on this, I would start with just the order of operations. You want to do your multiplication first. So I'm going to multiply this together. 3 times 2 is 6. X to the 5th times x to the 4th is x to the 9th. Y times y cubed becomes y to the 4th. And then I'm also going to multiply this together. 5 times understood 1 there is 5. X to the 7th times x squared becomes x to the 9th. Y squared times y squared becomes y to the 4th. And now we can add those two monomials together. So this is an x to the 9th, this is y to the 4th. They do have like terms. Remember to check for the like terms when we go to add things together. But we don't change the variables or the exponents at this point. We're just going to add the coefficients. So 6 and 5 becomes 11, x to the 9th, y to the 4th. Okay. So this should mostly be review from 8th grade. There may be a few things on there that might trip you up or just be a little bit new, or something that you're going to have to dig a little deeper to remember. Just keep in mind that we're going to be adding on to this and going into polynomials, so we want to make sure that we understand the monomials before we do that. So if you do have any questions, please make sure you ask them, and I'll be happy to help you.